Have you ever loved someone so much that you started shrinking yourself just to fit into their life? Not because they asked you to, not because they forced you to, but because, little by little, you realized you were always the extra, never the choice. You stayed. You tried harder. You told yourself, if I'm patient enough, if I'm good enough, if I'm quiet enough, one day they'll finally see me. And one day, they did see you. Just not the way you hoped. Because there is a special kind of pain that comes from loving someone who keeps reminding you that your place in their life is temporary. This is the story of a woman who lived in a palace, but slept in a marriage that never belonged to her. And before we begin, if you've ever loved someone who made you feel like a placeholder, if you've ever stayed where you were only tolerated, but not chosen, make sure you subscribe. Because this isn't just a fantasy about wolves and crowns. It's about what happens when someone finally stops begging to be loved and starts choosing themselves. Now, let me tell you about Avera, the queen who was borrowed. The Great Hall of Valoria was built to make people feel small. Its ceiling disappeared into shadow, held up by pillars carved with the old king's victories, wolves, crowns, and the same repeated warning etched into stone. Power does not apologize. Torches burned in iron sconces. Velvet banners hung like a judgment. The air smelled of incense, polished wood, and fear that had learned to speak politely. And at the center of it all stood the Alpha King. Revik wore his crown the way some men wore guilt, like it was heavy, but not heavy enough to change how they behaved. But he was handsome in a clean, cruel way, the kind of handsome that convinced people to forgive him before he even opened his mouth. And beside him, one step back, because the court loved its symbolism, stood Avera, Luna of the Ashen Crown Pack, queen of the realm in title and ceremony, a woman who had mastered the art of smiling through pain like it was part of the dress code. Her gown was moon-pale silk with silver embroidery that caught torchlight like quiet defiance. Her hair was braided with tiny pearls, each one placed by a maid who whispered, "You look beautiful, my Luna," like beauty could protect her from being unwanted. Avera's hands were folded, still and steady. That was her first skill. Stillness. Stillness when the nobles stared. Stillness when the council argued. For stillness when Revik spoke to her, like she was a convenient tool he had mistaken for a wife. She watched the court in that way she had learned over the years, half ruler, half prisoner, fully alert. The nobles were dressed in expensive politeness. The council elders sat in a semicircle like carved statues with opinions. Guards stood at attention, their armor gleaming, their eyes hard. And Avera, the Luna, stood there with the calm of someone who had survived 1,000 small humiliations without making the mistake of collapsing in public. She had learned the palace rules early. Never cry in the hall. Never beg in front of men who count weakness like currency. Never let them see how badly you want to be loved. Revik lifted a hand, and the hall quieted immediately. Power did that. It gathered silence like it was owed. "My lords," he began, voice carrying without effort. "My ladies." His gaze swept the room the way a wolf's might scan a forest, possessive, confident, satisfied. Then he smiled, and half the court looked relieved just to be included in the presence of his mood. "We speak today of loyalty," Revik continued, "and of truth." Avera's stomach tightened. Truth in this hall was usually a weapon. He turned slightly. The movement was small, casual, the kind of movement that did not appear important until it ruined your life. "When I was young," Revik said, "before the crown found its way to my head, there was a woman who understood me when no one else did." Avera didn't move. She didn't even blink. But something inside her, something tired and soft, curled in on itself as if bracing for impact. Revik's voice warmed with a nostalgia that he never used when he spoke to his wife. She was brave, he said. Intelligent. Loyal. She saw me when I was nothing. Somewhere in the crowd, a few noble women exchanged glances, the way women do when they smell a story about to become a scandal. A council elder shifted uncomfortably. Another stared at the floor, as if the marble tiles had suddenly become fascinating. Revik smiled wider. And then he said it, clean as a blade. Mirith is the only woman who ever truly understood me. There it was, a sentence that didn't just cut. It rewrote reality. Avera felt the court breathe, one collective inhale, like the entire kingdom had leaned forward to watch her react. But she didn't. Because she had practiced not reacting for 10 years. Her face remained composed. Her chin stayed level, but her hands stayed folded. Only her heart betrayed her, beating too hard against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Revik kept speaking, as if he hadn't just publicly reduced his Luna to a decorative object. I know the past is a dangerous thing to bring into the present, he said, voice smooth. But a man cannot deny the truth of his own soul. Avera thought, your soul is a selfish place. But she said nothing. She could hear it already, the whispers that would spread later. Poor Luna, she always knew, how humiliating. But she's lucky to be queen. At least she has the crown. As if the crown was a consolation prize for being unloved. Revik ended his speech with a flourish of noble words. Loyalty, duty, strength. The court applauded because the court always applauded. And Avera stood there, applauded with them, but smiling like a queen should, while something inside her quietly went cold. After the court dismissed, Avera returned to her chambers with the practiced grace of a woman who had learned how to carry devastation like jewelry. Her rooms were beautiful. That was the cruelty of it. Silk drapes, polished mirrors, a bed large enough for two people who never truly met in the middle. A maid lit candles and placed a tray of tea on the table. Another adjusted Avera's cloak as if this day was normal, as if her heart had not just been humiliated in front of the kingdom. Will you eat, my Luna? One of them asked softly. Avera looked at the tray. Thin soup, warm bread, honeyed fruit, and felt nothing. I'll eat later, she said. The maids bowed and left, closing the doors behind them. Silence filled the room. Not the peaceful kind. And the kind that presses its palms against your throat and waits to see if you'll break. Avera stood still for a moment, staring at her own reflection in the mirror. She looked like a queen. Perfect hair, perfect dress, perfect posture. And in her eyes, something that shouldn't exist in a woman with a crown. Loneliness. The door opened. Avera didn't turn right away. She knew his footsteps. She knew his presence. Revik entered her chambers like a man entering a room he owned, which, in his mind, he did. Why didn't you react? He asked. Avera turned slowly. What reaction were you hoping for? She replied, voice calm. Public tears? A scene? A knife? Revik frowned slightly, as if her composure offended him more than any scream would have. You embarrassed me, he said. Avera almost laughed. It's because it was so absurd it bordered on comedy, if comedy didn't hurt so much. I embarrassed you? She repeated. You stood there like stone, Revik said, like my words meant nothing. Avera's eyes flicked to him, sharp, quiet. Your words have meant everything for 10 years, she said. That's why I've learned not to show it. Revik stepped closer, his expression irritated in the way powerful men become irritated when their power doesn't produce the response they want. You know what this is, he said. You know why you are here. There it was again. That sentence, rearranged into a different cruelty. Know your place. Avera inhaled slowly. Tell me, she said. Say it again, since you enjoy it so much. Revik's jaw flexed. She was taken from me, he said. Mireth was stolen from this kingdom because her father wanted someone better for her, someone more powerful, and I— And you were nothing, Avera finished for him, voice cool. Revik's eyes flashed. Yes, he admitted, I was nothing. But now I am king, and the kingdom owes her a debt. Avera held up a hand. No, she said softly. Not the kingdom. You. Revik stared at her, and for a moment he looked like he might say something that sounded like regret. But regret wasn't his talent. Do not make this about you, he said. Avera's smile was small and tired. It has always been about me, she replied, because you made it about me every time you reminded me I wasn't her. Revik's gaze hardened. You exist because Myreth was taken from me, he said, voice flat. You were chosen because you were suitable, acceptable. A Luna who could hold the court while you waited, Avera said. Revik didn't deny it. Avera stepped toward him, close enough that he could see the truth in her eyes. Her voice dropped, not angry, worse than angry, honest. Then stop pretending this is a marriage, she said. The words landed between them like a final door closing. Revik stared at her. What would you call it? He asked, tone mocking. A duty? A contract? A political necessity? Avera didn't blink. I would call it what it is, she said. A cage with velvet curtains. Something flickered in Revik's expression. Annoyance, discomfort, maybe even a shadow of guilt. Then he straightened, reclaiming himself the way men like him always did. Mireth is returning, he said, and you will behave. Avera's hands clenched once, so fast it was almost invisible. I have always behaved, she replied. That has been my greatest crime. Revik turned toward the door, as if the conversation had ended, as if her pain was merely an inconvenience he had addressed. Then, just before he left, he paused and said almost casually, Remember your place, Avera. The door closed behind him. Avera stood still for a long moment. Then she walked to the table, poured herself tea with steady hands, and took a sip. It was warm. It tasted like nothing. She stared at the steam rising from the cup and thought, not with rage but with a terrifying clarity. I have been surviving a heartbreak that never ends. She was still standing when a knock came at her door. A rapid knock. Urgent. Wrong. A guard entered without waiting to be invited, already breaking protocol, which meant something truly serious had happened. And he knelt quickly. My Luna, he said breathless. Forgive me. There's news. Avera's spine straightened. What news? The guard swallowed hard. It's Mireth, he said. The scouts. They found proof. Avera's heart tightened, though she wasn't sure why. Perhaps because even pain likes to be prepared before it arrives. And? She asked. The guard lifted his head, eyes wide. She's alive, he said, and she's returning to Valoria. Avera didn't move. She didn't speak. For a moment the palace felt like it tilted slightly, as if reality itself had shifted. And in the quiet that followed, Avera realized something with bone-deep certainty. This wasn't the beginning of a reunion. This was the beginning of her replacement. Avera learned something important the morning after court. It wasn't that Revik loved Mireth. She had always known that. It was that her name still had the power to unmake him. The council chamber was smaller than the Great Hall, but heavier, less ceremony, more teeth. The walls were lined with maps of Valoria and the surrounding territories, each one marked with old victories and older grudges. The table was carved from dark oak, scarred by generations of arguments that had decided who lived comfortably and who didn't live at all. Avera took her place at Revik's side, as she always did. Not because he asked, because the kingdom expected it. The elders were already seated. Some avoided her eyes. Some looked at her with that careful, pitying distance people used when they didn't want to admit they were watching a slow tragedy. Revik stood at the head of the table, hands braced against the wood, posture rigid. He hadn't slept. Avera could see it in the tightness of his jaw, in the way his shoulders held tension like armor. He looked like a man bracing for a storm he wanted and feared at the same time. An elder cleared his throat. "We should discuss the matter from yesterday," he said carefully. Revik didn't look at him. "Which matter?" Revik asked, though they both knew exactly which one. "The mention of Lady Mirith," another counselor said, choosing his words like they were stepping stones over a pit. "The court is unsettled." That did it. Revik's head snapped up. "Mirith," he said, and the room seemed to shrink around the sound of her name. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but something in him shifted, like a crack in stone finally giving way. "She is not a matter," he said. "She is a part of this kingdom's history. And mine." Avera watched him then, not as his wife, not as his Luna, but as a woman who had spent 10 years studying the way a man's heart betrays him. His hands were clenched. His breathing was wrong, too fast, too shallow. This was not the controlled Alpha King who ruled Valoria with measured decisions and political patience. This was a man standing too close to an old wound. "With respect, Your Majesty," the elder said, "your words yesterday have already caused speculation. About the Queen's position, about—" "My wife's position is exactly what it has always been," Revik cut in. Avera felt the words before she understood them. She turned slightly toward him. "And what is that?" she asked quietly. The room went very still. Revik looked at her, and for a moment something unreadable crossed his face. Not kindness, not cruelty, or indifference, dressed up as honesty. "You know what it is," he said. Avera held his gaze. "No," she said. "I know what you've treated it as. That's not the same thing." The counselors shifted. This was not how these meetings usually went. The Luna was meant to smooth things, translate tempers into diplomacy, not ask dangerous questions. Revik's eyes narrowed. "Do not do this here," he said. "Why?" Avera asked. "Because they might hear the truth? Or because you don't like how it sounds when you say it out loud?" Silence pressed in from all sides. Then she asked the question that had been rotting quietly in her chest since yesterday. "If she comes back," Avera said, voice steady, "what happens to me?" Revik stared at her. Not with anger, not with surprise, with something worse. Certainty. "You were always temporary," he said. But the words landed like a verdict, not shouted, not dramatized, just stated, like a fact he had never bothered to hide. Avera felt it then, the strange, distant sensation of something finally breaking after being bent for too long. Around them, the council sat frozen. Someone inhaled sharply. Someone else looked down at the table like it had suddenly become very interesting. Avera nodded once, slowly. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" Revik asked, frowning. "For finally saying it without pretending it was kinder than it is." Revik turned away, already done with the conversation. "As long as you remember your duties, nothing changes," he said. Avera thought, everything just did. They left the chamber separately. That too had become normal. Avera walked through the palace corridors with the calm of someone carrying a fresh wound that hadn't started bleeding yet. Servants bowed. Guards saluted. The world continued as if nothing had shifted. She wondered how many people lived like this, smiling in public, breaking in private, calling it loyalty. She reached the small garden tucked between the east wing and the old library, a place she went when the palace felt too loud. The winter flowers were stubborn things, pale and delicate looking, but impossible to kill. She admired that about them. Footsteps approached. She didn't turn. "Why do you keep asking questions you don't want answered?" Revik said behind her. Avera closed her eyes briefly. "I wanted to know if you would lie," she said. "You didn't. That's something." He scoffed softly. "Or you've always known how this was." "Yes," she said. "I just didn't realize how easily you'd say it once you didn't need me anymore." He stepped closer. "You're still my Luna." "For now," Avera replied. Revik's jaw tightened. "You are turning this into something it doesn't need to be." Avera turned to face him. "No," she said. "I'm finally seeing it as what it is." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then hurried footsteps echoed down the path. A young scout approached, breathless, eyes wide with urgency. He stopped short when he saw both of them, then dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty, my Luna." Revik's irritation flared. "What is it?" The scout swallowed. "There's been a second report." Avera felt a strange, cold awareness settle in her chest. "About Mireth?" Revik asked. "Yes," the scout said. "She was seen near the Western Pass, traveling with a small escort." Revik's posture changed instantly, alert, sharp, focused. "And?" he demanded. The scout hesitated. "An hour ago we lost contact with them," he said. "The Border Patrol found signs of a struggle, broken tracks, blood." Avera's fingers curled slowly at her side. "Who?" Revik asked. The scout lifted his head. "The Red Wastes pack," he said. The name fell into the air like a blade. "They took her," the scout continued. "Our trackers are certain. Mireth has been kidnapped." For a heartbeat, the world went very quiet. Then Revik moved. Orders snapped from him like thunder. Guards summoned, horses prepared, messengers sent. The Alpha King was already turning this into a mission, a rescue, a crusade. Avera stood there and realized something with cold, but terrifying clarity. Whatever was about to happen, she was not the one he would choose. And as Revik barked commands and the palace erupted into motion, Avera understood that this wasn't just a crisis. It was the beginning of the moment that would decide who she was, and who she would stop being. Avera had attended funerals before. State funerals. Quiet funerals. The kind where grief wore velvet and people cried into lace handkerchiefs while calculating inheritances. None of them felt like this. The courtyard of Veloria was already in chaos when she arrived. Horses stamped, armor clinked, servants ran with packs and weapons and last-minute orders. The palace had the frantic energy of a body preparing for amputation. Everyone moving fast. No one quite brave enough to say what was about to be lost. Revik stood near his warhorse, but issuing commands like a man who had finally found something simple to focus on. "Light cavalry rides ahead. Send word to the Western Watch. No delays." He looked alive in a way Avera had not seen in years. Not calm, not controlled. Alive. Avera stopped beside her own horse and watched him for a moment longer than was wise. It hurt in a very specific way, to realize someone else's danger had woken something in him that her devotion never could. A captain noticed her and bowed quickly. "My Luna, your escort is ready." "My place is with the king," Avera said. The words still came automatically. Revik didn't look at her when she mounted. They rode out at dawn. The gates of Veloria opened with a groan, like something ancient being dragged awake, and the column of riders poured onto the road like a dark river. What the city disappeared behind them. So did the last illusion Avera had been carrying. The road to the western border cut through pine forests and rocky hills, the air sharp with cold and distance. Hooves beat a steady, merciless rhythm against the ground. No one spoke much. Even the soldiers seemed to understand this wasn't a victory march. Avera rode a little behind Revik, as protocol demanded, Not beside him. Never beside him. She studied the terrain as they went, habit and training moving her eyes before her heart could get in the way. Narrow passes, high ridges, places where an ambush would be easy, places where retreat would be impossible. She rode up beside Revik despite protocol. "We shouldn't take the river path," she said. "The cliffs narrow there. If the Red Wastes pack wanted leverage, but that's where they'd stage it." Revik didn't even turn his head. "We're taking the fastest route," he said. "The fastest route is the most predictable," Avera replied. "They'll expect it, if they wanted to trap us." "I said we're taking the fastest route," he repeated, sharper this time. Avera fell silent, not because she agreed, because she recognized that look in his eyes. He wasn't leading a rescue. He was racing time. She tried again an hour later, pointing out a ridge that would give them better visibility. He ignored her. Tried again when the road narrowed, and the trees grew too close together. He dismissed her with a gesture. By midday, she stopped trying. It wasn't strategy he wanted. It was Mirith. They rode through long stretches of quiet, where only the wind and the sound of armor breaking rhythm existed. Avera found herself thinking of small, useless things. How Revik used to complain about dust on his boots. How he always drank tea instead of wine when his stomach hurt. How she used to prepare medicinal broth on nights he came back from council tense and silent. He hadn't noticed when she stopped doing that. At some point, the thought formed fully in her mind, sharp and undeniable. This isn't a rescue mission. It's a replacement procession. The realization sat heavy in her chest like a stone. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in bruised colors, Avera urged her horse closer to Revik again. He sighed like she was an inconvenience. "What?" he asked. She didn't soften her voice. "Would you trade anything for her?" Revik's horse kept moving. So did he. For a few heartbeats, and the only sound was hooves and wind and the distant cry of a bird. Then, nothing. No answer. No denial. No lie. Just silence. And silence, Avera realized, was the answer. She nodded once to herself. "Thank you," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure what she was thanking him for. Honesty, perhaps, or confirmation. Revik didn't look at her. They rode on. By the time the Red Wastes came into view, the land had changed. The trees thinned. The earth turned dry and rust-colored. Wind swept across open plains that looked empty until you realized how easy it would be to hide an army in them. The border markers were old stones, half buried in the dirt, carved with warnings no one read anymore. The soldiers slowed. Scouts rode ahead, and then one of them lifted an arm. "There," he said. Revik rode forward sharply. Avera followed. On a low ridge just beyond the markers, a small group stood waiting. No chains, no guards holding her upright, no signs of struggle. And at the center of them, Mirith. She stood in a pale traveling cloak, hair loose, untouched by dust or fear. She wasn't injured. She wasn't trembling. She was watching. Watching Revik. And when she saw him, she smiled. Avera felt something inside her go very, very quiet. Because in that moment, she understood something far worse than betrayal. This had never been about a rescue. It had always been about a choice. And she already knew who he was going to pick. The Red Wastes did not look like a place that begged. The land was open, harsh, and honest. Wind-scoured earth, low ridges and scattered stone outcrops that offered just enough cover to hide an army without pretending to be gentle about it. It the kind of place where survival was not romantic and power was not inherited. It was taken, defended, and kept. Revik's riders slowed as they crossed the old border stones. The air felt watched, not in a mystical way, in a practical one. The kind that told you there were eyes on you from places you couldn't see, and hands already resting on weapons. Avera's gaze went first to Mireth. She stood where they had left her, calm, clean, and conspicuously unhurt. The sight twisted something in Avera's chest, not because of jealousy, but because of what it confirmed. This was never a rescue. Revik dismounted before anyone else, boots hitting the ground with sharp finality. "Mireth," he said, and his voice did something it never did when he said Avera's name. Relief, urgency, care. Mireth took a step forward, ein eyes shining just enough to look fragile without actually being so. "I knew you'd come," she said. Revik moved as if to close the distance, and then someone else stepped into the space between them. He did not shout. He did not draw a blade. He did not bare his teeth like a challenge. He simply walked forward and stopped, perfectly at ease in the center of tension. Cailerin. He was tall in the way men who had survived hard places often were, not built for display, but for endurance. His armor was dark and worn, not ceremonial. His cloak bore no crest. His eyes, however, were sharp and assessing, the kind that missed very little and forgot even less. The soldiers behind him did not move. They didn't need to. Cailerin raised one hand, not in surrender, not in threat, in greeting. "King Revik of Valoria," he said. His voice was calm, or controlled. "You rode far for someone who does not belong to you." Revik's jaw tightened. "She belongs to me," he said. "She is under my protection." Cailerin's gaze flicked briefly to Mireth, then, very deliberately, shifted to Avera. Not dismissive, not curious, measuring, like he was trying to understand the shape of her story from the way she stood. "And yet," Cailerin said, "you didn't look at her when you said that." The words were quiet. They landed like a dropped blade. Revik stiffened. "This doesn't concern you." "Everything that happens on my land concerns me," Cailerin replied, "especially when kings ride in with soldiers and old emotions they haven't learned to control." Avera felt his attention return to her, steady and unintrusive, not like Revik's gaze, which always carried ownership. Cailerin's looked like recognition. "Aren't you the Luna?" he said, not asking. Avera inclined her head. "I am." "Interesting," Cailerin said. "You don't stand like someone who is owned." The words were so soft only she heard them, but they hit harder than anything Revik had said to her in 10 years. She met Cailerin's eyes. There was no pity there, no hunger, just something like respect. Given, not performed. Revik stepped forward, clearly irritated. "This is not a negotiation," he said. "You took someone under my protection. You will return her." Cailerin turned his attention back to him. "We didn't take her from your lands," he said. "She came to us, unharmed, unchained, unafraid." Mireth glanced at Cailerin, then back at Revik, her expression carefully arranged. "They said they would keep me safe," she said softly. Revik's hands curled into fists. "What, you don't belong here," he said to Cailerin. "Your people were banished for a reason." Cailerin's expression did not change. "Yes," he said, "and your people have been very good at pretending that reason was justice." The tension in the air sharpened. Avera could feel it, soldiers shifting weight, hands tightening on hilts, breaths held too long. She stepped forward before she quite realized she was going to. "This doesn't need to become blood," she said. "We can talk." Revik shot her a look. "This is not your concern." Cailerin's eyes narrowed slightly. "Everything here concerns her," he said evenly. "She's the only one at this table who isn't pretending this is simple." Then he turned to Revik and said the words that changed everything. "She stays, or you leave without her." The wind seemed to pause. Revik stared at him, a disbelief and fury colliding in his expression. "You're asking for a war," he said. Calorin's mouth curved in the faintest, humorless smile. "No," he said. "I'm offering you a choice." And Avera understood, with sudden clarity, that this man did not threaten. He decided. The wind carried silence across the red wastes, not the peaceful kind, the kind that waited to see who would bleed first. Revik and Calorin stood facing each other, the space between them charged with too many unsaid things, old grudges, new desperation, and a woman standing in the middle of a decision that should never have been hers to suffer. Avera could feel every eye on her, the soldiers of Valoria, the warriors of the Red Wastes, Mireth watching with something too sharp behind her softness, and Revik, who still had not looked at his wife. Calorin's words hung in the air. "She stays, or you leave without her." Revik's jaw worked as if he were grinding something to dust. "You're not in a position to make demands," he said. Calorin's reply was calm. "You rode onto my land. You brought soldiers. You brought a problem. That makes you exactly in a position to choose." Revik laughed once, short and humorless. "You want her?" he asked, jerking his chin toward Mireth. "Fine. Then we negotiate." Avera's heart slowed. Not raced. Slowed. That was the moment she knew. Revik turned, finally, to look at her. Not with apology, not with hesitation, with calculation. "Take my Luna," he said. "Give me Mireth." The words echoed. They didn't need to be shouted. They didn't need to be dressed in ceremony. They were already ugly enough. For a heartbeat, no one moved. And then someone in Revik's ranks sucked in a sharp breath. Another shifted, like he wanted to pretend he hadn't heard. Mireth's eyes widened, then softened, as if she were watching a play whose ending she had always known. Calorin didn't speak immediately. He looked at Revik, then he looked at Avera, not like someone appraising property, like someone checking if she was standing, still breathing, still choosing. Avera felt something cold and distant move through her. Not shock, not even anger, just confirmation. So this was the price. She turned fully to Revik. "Was any of it real?" she asked. Her voice did not shake. The question did. The 10 years, the vows, the quiet nights, the small acts he never noticed. Revik hesitated. Just for a second. And that second was louder than any lie he could have told. Or it was necessary, he said. Avera nodded slowly. "I see." That was all she said. No screaming, no collapse, no begging. Calorin stepped forward then, not toward Revik, toward her. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her. He simply held out his hand, open, empty, not a claim, an exit. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "You're not a bargaining piece unless you decide to be." Avera looked at his hand. Then she looked at Revik. He was already looking past her, toward Mireth. Already done, already finished. The world felt very far away, and very clear. Avera took a breath. Then she placed her hand in Calorin's. The contact was brief, steady, real, but the meaning of it rippled outward like a stone dropped into still water. Calorin closed his fingers around hers and turned, guiding her away with deliberate, unhurried steps. Revik did not stop them, did not call her name, did not reach out. Mireth was already moving toward him. Avera didn't look back, because some doors only close once, and some choices rewrite history. The Red Wastes did not greet Avera like a kingdom greets a queen. No trumpets, no banners, no practiced bows. They simply watched her. Calorin led her through the outer ring of the camp at an unhurried pace, as if daring anyone to treat her like cargo. The land here was rough and honest, tents staked into hard earth, cook fires burning low and steady, weapons stacked where hands could reach them in the dark. The people moved with purpose, not ceremony. Some paused when they saw her, Some kept working and measured her with their eyes. No one knelt. Avera felt the instinct to straighten, and to arrange her face into the polite mask she had worn for years. Then she stopped herself. Why perform for people who never asked you to pretend? This is different, she said. Cailorin glanced at her. Different how? In Valoria, respect is something you display, Avera replied. Here, it feels like something you test. He nodded once. Here, it's something you earn. They passed a group repairing armor. A woman with scarred hands didn't look up from her work. A young man carrying water glanced at Avera, curious, then went back to his task. No whispers, no flattery, no reverence. No one treated her like a prize. No one treated her like a threat, either. It was disorienting. Cailorin stopped near a large fire pit at the center of the camp. You can stay here tonight. No guards at your door, no locks. Avera blinked. Or you're not afraid I'll try to leave? He considered that. If you want to leave, you will. I'm not interested in keeping people who don't want to stay. The words landed gently and cut deeply, because Revik had never said anything like that. Avera nodded. Thank you. He hesitated, then added, If you need anything, ask. If you want space, take it. No one here will claim you. Claim. The word lingered like a ghost. Cailorin left her there, not with guards, not with instructions, but with something far rarer. Choice. She walked the camp alone as the sun dipped low, turning the red wastes into a sea of rust and shadow. People nodded at her. Some ignored her. One woman offered her a cup of water without ceremony. Avera took it and said, Thank you. The woman studied her face for a moment, then said, You don't look like someone who needs saving. Avera almost smiled. When night came, the camp changed. Fires burned brighter. Voices softened. Laughter appeared in unexpected places, rough and unpolished but real. Avera sat near the fire Cailorin had indicated, warming her hands and listening. No one asked her who she was married to. No one asked her what she had lost. They waited to see who she would be. Later, Cailorin joined her, carrying 2 cups of something that smelled like strong tea and sharper herbs. Not palace safe, he said, offering one. But it keeps you warm. Avera accepted it. I think I'm done with palace safe. They sat in silence for a while, watching sparks drift up into the dark. You could have refused my hand, Cailorin said eventually. I know, Avera replied. Why didn't you? She thought about that. But because he had already let go, she said, and because staying would have meant agreeing that I was something he could give away. Cailorin nodded, as if that answer fit a shape he already recognized. After a moment, he said, You were traded. That doesn't make you small. It makes your former king stupid. The words were blunt, not cruel, not kind. True. Avera stared into the fire and felt something inside her loosen for the first time in years. I spent a long time believing endurance was the same thing as worth, she said quietly. Endurance is just what you do when you don't see another option, Cailorin replied. Worth is what you decide you won't live without. She looked at him then. Really looked. There was no hunger in his gaze, no ownership, no expectation. Just a steady, unassuming respect. It scared her a little. Arden soothed her more. They talked until the fire burned low, about the red wastes, about exile, about what it meant to build something with people who had been told they were disposable. Cailorin spoke of betrayal without bitterness. Avera spoke of duty without romance. When they finally stood, the camp was quiet. Sleep, Cailorin said. Tomorrow will be louder. She nodded. It usually is. The shout came just before dawn. Avera was awake instantly, the years in the palace having taught her to recognize the sound of urgency dressed as command. Scouts rode in hard and fast, dust still clinging to their boots. Caloran was already moving, already listening. "Veloria is fortifying," one of them reported. "Walls reinforced, banners raised, troops mobilizing." Caloran's jaw tightened. "They're preparing for war," the scout finished. Avera felt the weight of that settle in her chest. Not fear, understanding. Revik wasn't coming to apologize. He was coming to win. And suddenly, the Red Wastes didn't feel like a refuge. They felt like the beginning of a line that would be crossed with blood. The palace felt wrong without Avera. Revik noticed it in small, irritating ways at first. The council chamber was louder. The servants hesitated more. The rhythm of the court stuttered like a song missing its quietest, most important note. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself it was the absence of routine, the shift in household order, the aftermath of a rushed departure and an even more rushed return. He did not tell himself that he missed her. That word felt dangerous. Mireth moved through the palace like she had always belonged there. She changed the drapes, or changed the menu, changed the way servants spoke to her, encouraging familiarity, rewarding flattery, punishing hesitation. The palace bent quickly to her preferences. It always did for beautiful women who smiled like they were owed things. Revik watched her sometimes, and waited for the satisfaction he had imagined for years. It didn't come. The food was too spicy. He couldn't finish most meals. When he mentioned it once, Mireth laughed and said, "You'll learn." He remembered, unpleasantly, how Avera used to notice before he did. How she would quietly send for the herbalist or have soup brought instead of wine. Mireth didn't notice, or didn't care. The first crack came in the East Gallery. Revik was walking back from a council meeting, already tired of arguments that used to feel easier when Avera was there to smooth them, which when he heard voices through a half-open door. Mireth's laughter, Thalos's low, satisfied chuckle. He slowed without meaning to. "Told you he'd do it," Mireth was saying. "He always does. He needs to feel like the hero." "And you were very convincing," Thalos replied. "The tears were a nice touch." Revik stopped. Something cold slid down his spine. "Please," Mireth said lightly. "The kidnapping story was your idea. I just made it believable." They laughed together. Revik stood very still. "You were right about one thing," Thalos said. "Trading his Luna was the obvious move. The man is many things, but subtle isn't one of them." Mireth's voice softened, almost fond. "He was always predictable. That's why I left in the first place. I didn't want a man without power. Now he has a crown, and still the same weaknesses." Revik's vision blurred at the edges. "So you never intended to," Thalos began. "Marry him?" Mireth finished. "Of course not. I wanted the throne, or at least access to it. If I have to pretend for a while, so be it." There it was. Not betrayal. Revelation. Revik pushed the door open. It hit the wall hard enough to make both of them jump. Mireth turned, color draining from her face. "Revik." "How long?" he asked. His voice didn't sound like his own. Thalos straightened, trying for dignity. "Your Majesty, this is a misunderstanding." "How long?" Revik repeated, louder. Mireth's mouth opened, closed. "Since I heard you'd become king," she said quietly. The words finished what the laughter had started. Revik felt something inside him tear loose. He didn't shout, didn't strike, and that would have been easier. "Guards," he said, and his voice carried the weight of the crown at last. They came running. "Take Lady Mireth and Elder Thalos into custody," he said. "The dungeon. Separate cells." Mireth's composure shattered. "You can't do this," she said, stepping toward him. After everything you planned," Revik said. "Get them out of my sight." They were dragged away, Mireth still protesting, Thalos still calculating. The door closed. The gallery felt suddenly too large, too empty. Revik stood there and finally allowed himself to understand the full shape of what he had done. He had traded a woman who loved him for a lie that had never even respected him. The realization tasted like ash. He turned sharply and strode for the stables. "Horses," he barked. "Now." Within the hour, but he was riding west with a small, hard-eyed escort. This was not a royal procession. This was a man chasing the last thing he hadn't already broken. The ride was brutal. No ceremony, no speeches, just distance and dust, and the sound of hooves pounding out a rhythm that matched the pulse in his ears. When the red wastes finally rose from the horizon, he felt a surge of something dangerously close to hope. They reached the camp at dusk. Or rather, where the camp had been. Ashes, cold fire pits, tracks leading in too many directions to follow. No banners, no people, no Avera. A scout dismounted and knelt. "They moved, Your Majesty, recently, but they're gone." Revik stared at the empty land. For the first time, it truly hit him. He didn't know where she was. And worse, he no longer had any right to know. But Avera woke before dawn with the strange, quiet certainty that she could leave. No guards at her door, no locks, no chains, just a tent flap stirring in the wind and a camp that did not belong to her. For a long moment she lay still and listened to the red wastes breathe. Boots on gravel, low voices, the crackle of a fire being coaxed back to life. It was a living place, but not a holding one. No one here would stop her if she saddled a horse and rode east. She could go anywhere. That was the problem. She sat up slowly, letting the truth settle. There was no palace waiting for her. No marriage, no role written in stone. Freedom felt less like wings, and more like standing at the edge of something very deep and very wide. She dressed and stepped outside. The camp was already awake. People moved with purpose, repairing gear, breaking fast, or checking weapons. Cailerin stood near a map spread over a low table, speaking with 2 scouts. He looked up when he saw her, then nodded once and went back to listening. He didn't come to her. He didn't ask what she planned to do. That, somehow, mattered. Avera walked the perimeter of the camp, watching how people moved, how supplies were stored, how patrols rotated. The habits of leadership were muscle memory to her now. You didn't need a throne to see inefficiencies. By the time she returned to the map table, Cailerin had dismissed the scouts. "You're leaving?" he asked, not unkindly. "I was considering it," Avera said honestly. Then she looked down at the map. "But if you're going to fight a kingdom, you can't do it like this." Cailerin arched an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like a clan," she replied. "Or do you need to think like an army?" That got his attention. He folded his arms, studying her. Not suspicious, not dismissive. Curious. "Show me," he said. So she did. She pointed out supply routes that were too long, patrol patterns that were too predictable, places where Valoria's terrain would favor defense instead of speed. She spoke in the language of logistics and pressure points, not hope. Cailerin listened. Then he argued. They disagreed about where to split their forces, about whether speed or secrecy mattered more, about whether to strike first or wait. It wasn't polite. It wasn't gentle. At one point, Cailerin said, "You're thinking like a ruler who's never had to fight with half a blade." Avera shot back, "And you're thinking like a warrior who's never had to keep people fed while doing it." They stared at each other. Then, slowly, something changed. They weren't actually disagreeing about the goal. They were arguing about the same problem from different sides. Cailerin exhaled and dragged a hand down his face. "We want the same outcome," he said. "You're just trying to keep us alive while we get there." Avera's mouth curved slightly. And you're trying to make sure we actually get there. They adjusted the map together. By midday, the plan looked dangerous and possible. Someone brought water. Someone else brought bread. No ceremony, no titles, just work. When the sun dipped, Kaloran finally stepped back from the table. "You could still leave," he said. "No one here would think less of you." Avera looked at the lines they had drawn together. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm staying." He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Or fair." They walked a little away from the camp, to where the ground sloped down toward a shallow ravine. The wind was colder here. Cleaner. Kaloran leaned against a rock and said, almost casually, "Revik isn't the first king who thought he could decide my life for me." Avera turned to him. "Before exile," he continued, "I was supposed to inherit Valoria's throne, or something close enough to make powerful men uncomfortable. They decided it was easier to remove me than compete with me." He didn't sound bitter. He sounded finished with it. "They called it justice," he said. "I called it survival." Avera nodded slowly. "They called mine duty." Their eyes met. The space between them felt different suddenly. Not charged like before, not careful, aware, not safe, not innocent. Just honest. Kaloran looked away first. "Where's we move at dawn?" he said. "If we're going to do this, we do it before Valoria finishes building its walls higher." Avera's pulse steadied instead of spiking. "Then we march," she said. And this time, the decision wasn't made for her. It was hers. The skirmish was not meant to happen. That was the first lie the battlefield told. They had planned to avoid contact, to test the edges of Valoria's patrols, to map response times, to leave with more information than blood. But plans were fragile things, and fear had a way of making men louder than maps. It began with a horn in the distance, then arrows, then shouting. Avera found herself moving without thinking, directing riders left, pulling reserves back, watching the terrain the way she had learned to watch courtrooms, for where people would panic and where pressure would break them. But Kaloran was already there, where the line was thinning. He fought like someone who didn't waste motion, no flourish, no fury, just decisions made fast and paid for in sweat. He turned a charge aside. He shouted an order. He pulled a rider out from under a fallen horse. And then a blade caught him high on the shoulder, glancing but deep enough to matter. He didn't go down. He didn't even slow. That scared her more than if he had. They broke contact minutes later. Short, sharp, ugly. The red wastes pulled back into the ravine, leaving the field quiet except for the sound of breathing that came too hard and too fast. Only then did Kaloran sit. Only then did he let the pain show. Avera was already there. "Hold still," she said, more command than request. He gave a short, almost smile. "That's not my best skill." "Then pretend," she replied, and took his arm before he could argue. The cut wasn't mortal, but it was messy. Blood had soaked into his armor, darkening the leather. She worked quickly, hands steady, mind quieter than it had been all day. Someone brought water. Someone brought cloth. Then they left, as if they understood that this was not a spectacle. Avera cleaned the wound with careful precision. Kaloran hissed once, then said nothing. "You're terrible at being injured," she said. "I've had practice," he replied, "just not at sitting still for it." She glanced up at him, and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between their eyes. There was dust on his cheek, a shallow line of blood at his collarbone. He looked human, not a banner, not a symbol, just a man who had stood where it hurt. She tied the bandage tighter than necessary. He noticed, and didn't comment. Silence settled. Not awkward, not empty. The kind that felt like it was waiting for honesty to arrive and take a seat. If we survive this, Kaloran said quietly, we need to talk about what this is. Avera's hands paused. Not because she didn't understand. Because she did. She finished the knot and sat back on her heels, giving him space instead of taking it. If we survive this, she said, meeting his gaze, I want to choose for myself. For once. He nodded. No disappointment. No pressure. Fair, he said. I'm not interested in being another man who decides for you. The air between them shifted. Not safe, not innocent, but honest. They sat like that for a moment longer than necessary, shorter than they wanted. Then footsteps approached at a run. A scout appeared at the edge of the ravine, breathless. Sirs, we've got confirmation, he said. Revik is consolidating forces, reinforcing the capital. He's preparing to defend Valoria. Avera stood slowly. Kaloran pushed himself to his feet, testing his shoulder, then straightened. So, he said, eyes hardening just a little. He's not coming to talk. Avera looked toward the horizon where the land rose and fell like a held breath. No, she said, he's coming to keep what he thinks is his. And for the first time since she had taken Kaloran's hand at the border, she understood exactly how close they were to crossing the line, where there would be no more almosts. Revik had always been obeyed. That was the difference he noticed first. Not the silence, that had always followed him like a shadow, but the quality of it. Before, it had been the quiet of attention. Now it was the quiet of caution. But the soldiers in the training yard moved too quickly when he passed. The officers answered too sharply. No one argued with him anymore. Not because they agreed, because they were afraid. He stood on the stone balcony overlooking the yard and felt something sour settle in his chest. Fear was a useful tool. It was also a terrible foundation. The council chamber was no better. They sat straighter, spoke less, chose their words like men crossing thin ice. Where once they had pushed back, carefully, respectfully, now they waited for his mood before offering anything that might resemble an opinion. Revik found himself thinking, with an irritation he didn't quite understand. Avera would have argued. She would have done it politely. She would have done it in a way that made compromise look like victory. She would have done it before things reached this brittle edge. An elder cleared his throat. The western walls can be reinforced within a week, Your Majesty. Do it, Revik said. And the grain stores? Another asked. If this becomes a long siege. Ration, Revik replied. There was a pause. Then, carefully, the people won't like that. They don't have to like it, he said. They have to survive it. The council exchanged looks. Revik saw it, and for the first time, he realized they weren't looking to him for guidance. They were looking for damage control. The meeting ended quickly. Too quickly, as if no one wanted to be the last person in the room with him. He walked the corridors afterward, and felt the palace lean away from him. Servants bowed deeper. Guards stood stiffer. Conversations died when he approached, but he told himself it was because of the coming war. He did not tell himself it was because he had traded his Luna like a coin, and everyone had seen it. In a side chamber, two junior nobles were arguing in low voices. They stopped when they noticed him. Speak, Revik said, tired. One of them hesitated. The other blurted, The supply routes through the north are exposed. If the Red Wastes strike there, we'll lose 3 weeks of provisions. That's not a solution, Revik said. No, Your Majesty, the noble said quickly. But the Queen... He stopped, swallowed. The Queen would have suggested a staggered convoy and rotating guards, he finished. Revik's chest tightened. Yes, he said quietly. She would have. They stared at him, startled. He waved them away. Do it her way. They left, confused. But Revik stood alone in the chamber and realized what he was doing. He was using her mind in rooms she would never enter again. defending her decisions to people who would never hear her voice. The irony tasted like rust. That night, he ate alone. The food was too spicy. Again. He pushed the plate away and almost laughed, almost, at how predictable even his regret had become. She would have noticed, he thought. He found himself remembering things he had trained himself not to value. The way Avera used to stand slightly to his left in council so she could see everyone's faces. The way she never contradicted him in public, but always did in private, with reasons he couldn't ignore. The way the kingdom had felt. Steadier. Regret was not loud. It was slow. It rotted you from the inside. A messenger arrived near midnight. Revik was still awake. "Or they've confirmed it, Your Majesty," the man said, breathless. "The Red Waste's forces are mobilizing, and, Revik demanded. The messenger hesitated. "They're not just following Kaloran," he said. "They're following her." Revik's stomach dropped. "Explain." The messenger swallowed. "Scouts report that Avera is commanding alongside him, planning routes, directing movement. The men are calling her the Queen of the March." The words hit harder than any accusation. Avera. Leading. Not surviving. Not hiding. Not waiting. Revik closed his eyes. When he opened them, the world felt narrower and sharper. "She's leading the invasion," he said. Not as a question, as a sentence he had written himself. The battlefield did not look the way Revik had imagined it. He had expected chaos, noise, and the kind of disorder that made victory feel like something you could still force through sheer will. Instead, what he saw from the walls of Veloria was order. The Red Wastes moved like a single thought, given shape. Lines shifted, units repositioned, feints drew defenders out of place with almost insulting precision. This was not the work of a reckless exile or a desperate clan. This was a campaign. Revik stood at the parapet, hands braced on cold stone, and searched the field with a spyglass. He found Kaloran easily. Dark armor, steady posture, always where the pressure was greatest but never where it was wasted. Then he saw her. Avera rode a pale horse near the center of the formation, not hidden, not protected like something fragile. Messengers came to her. She spoke, they rode, and men moved. Not hesitantly, but not because they were afraid, because they trusted her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She wasn't just there. She was leading. "Hold the left," Revik ordered sharply. "They're drawing you out." The officer hesitated. "Your Majesty, the reports say, 'Hold the line,'" Revik snapped. They did. For a moment. Then Avera shifted her formation. Not a charge, not a retreat, a redirection. The left flank of the Red Wastes pulled back just enough to look weak. Veloria's troops surged forward, and the trap closed. Revik watched it happen and felt something inside him sink. She taught me to see that, he thought, and I never noticed I was learning. Kaloran rode closer to Avera, not to correct her, not to command her, to listen. They spoke briefly. He nodded. She gestured. The army adjusted. Equal. Not a general and his advisor, but not a king and his consort. Two leaders shaping the same battle. Revik lowered the spyglass. His chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with armor or age. "She's not yours anymore," someone said quietly behind him. Revik didn't turn. "I know," he said. The battle pressed closer to the walls. Veloria's defenders fought well, but they were reacting, not deciding. Every move they made felt like it had already been accounted for. Avera raised her hand. The Red Wastes advanced, not in a rush, not in anger, in certainty. The battering rams rolled forward under covering fire. The archers on the walls were forced back. The gates shuddered under the first impact. Revik watched, helpless, as the world he had built began to come apart under the direction of the woman he had once treated like a convenience. The gates groaned. Once, twice, and then the hinges screamed, and Valoria's gates began to fall. The throne room of Valoria had always been designed to impress. High ceilings, long sight lines, stone pillars carved with victories that pretended history had only ever belonged to one family. That morning, it was designed to witness an ending. The doors were already open when Cailerin walked in, not because he demanded it, but because no one left to defend them believed in closing them anymore. The Red Wastes didn't flood the room. They didn't shout. They didn't turn the palace into a spectacle. They simply arrived. Avera walked beside Cailerin, not behind him. She felt the weight of 100 stairs, the way power always announced itself before words did. Counselors stood in clusters like people who had spent the night rehearsing excuses. Guards shifted, unsure who they were supposed to be loyal to now that certainty had changed uniforms. Revik stood at the foot of the dais, crown still on his head. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Cailerin said, "I am here to take back what was taken from me." The words were not loud. They didn't need to be. A murmur rippled through the room. Some faces tightened. Some relaxed, like they'd been waiting for someone else to say it first. An elder stepped forward, hands folded too neatly. "You claim a birthright," he said. "On what proof?" Cailerin didn't look at Avera. He looked at the carvings on the pillars. "At the lies you've been standing under for decades," he said. "At the records you sealed. At the line you erased because it was inconvenient." He turned his gaze back to them. "And at the fact that you all know exactly who I am." Silence. Heavy. Guilty. Telling. One by one, counselors looked away from Revik. Not in shame, in calculation. Revik saw it happening. He straightened. "This is treason," he said. "You will not unmake a kingdom because an exile tells a better story." Cailerin met his eyes. "No," he said. "Your kingdom was unmade the day you started trading people like tools." That landed harder than any accusation of stolen bloodlines. Avera felt it ripple through the room. An elder cleared his throat. "We have records," he said. "Old ones. We've always known there was another claim. We simply chose stability." Cailerin's mouth curved in something that was not quite a smile. "You chose convenience." The elder didn't argue. He bowed. It was a small movement. It changed everything. Another counselor followed. Then another. Rivik looked around and saw the truth the way men always do. Too late, and all at once. "You'll regret this," he said, but the words didn't have the old weight anymore. Cailerin didn't answer. He didn't need to. He walked up the steps to the dais and stopped in front of the throne. Didn't sit, didn't rush. Just stood there, like someone acknowledging a place that had always been his, whether or not it had been kind enough to remember. "Revik of Valoria," he said, turning, "you are removed from this throne." Revik laughed once. "By whose authority?" "By the council's," Cailerin replied, and looked at them. They didn't look away this time. 2 guards stepped forward. Not Cailerin's. Revik's. They hesitated. Then one of them said very quietly, "Your Majesty, please." Revik stared at them. Then at Avera. For a moment, when something like panic flickered across his face. "Don't do this," he said, to them, to her, to the room. "You know what I am. You know what I can—" The guards took his arms. He didn't fight. That was the worst part. He let them lead him away like a man who had finally understood that strength, when spent badly, comes back as silence. The throne room exhaled. Not in relief, in inevitability. Later, when the palace had settled into a cautious, unfamiliar quiet, Kaloran stood with Avera near one of the tall windows overlooking the city. Smoke still drifted in thin lines where fighting had been brief and contained. The people were already gathering in the streets, not cheering yet, waiting to see what kind of future had just walked into their morning. "You don't look surprised," Kaloran said. "Ted, I've been watching this end for a long time," Avera replied. He studied her profile, the way she seemed steadier now that the world had finally stopped demanding she hold it together for someone else. "What do you want after this?" he asked. It wasn't a political question. It wasn't a king's question. It was careful. Avera looked out over Valoria. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "For the first time, I don't have an answer prepared." Kaloran nodded. "That's allowed." They stood in silence for a moment longer. Then a guard approached, clearing his throat. "Your Majesty," he said to Kaloran, then hesitated and added, "My queen." Avera didn't correct him. "He's asking for you," the guard said. "Revik. He says he won't speak to anyone else." Avera's chest tightened, not with fear, with finality. She closed her eyes once. "Don't tell him," she said, opening them again. "I'm coming." Revik knelt, not because anyone forced him, not because guards stood ready to make him, but because for the first time in his life, he did not know what else to do. The chamber they brought Avera to was small and unadorned, once used for private audiences that required silence more than spectacle. The crown was gone from his head. His fine cloak had been taken. He looked smaller, not weaker, just finally human. Avera stopped a few steps inside the door. The guards withdrew. The door closed. It was just the two of them, and 10 years. Revik lifted his head slowly. "I was wrong," he said, not dramatically, not defensively, just tired. Avera didn't answer. She waited. "I told myself I was choosing the woman I loved," he continued. "But that was a lie. I was choosing the version of myself I liked better when I thought she wanted me." His hands tightened into fists on the stone floor. "I used you," he said. "I hid behind duty and politics and told myself it made me less cruel. It didn't." Avera's voice, when she spoke, was quiet. "No, it just made you comfortable." He nodded. "I am sorry," he said. "Not the kind of sorry that wants forgiveness, the kind that knows it doesn't deserve it." That was new. She studied him. This man had ruled a kingdom. He had traded her like a thing. He had broken something in her and called it necessity. And now he was here. Small, bare, honest. But honesty, she had learned, did not rewrite history. "You don't miss me," Avera said. He flinched. "You miss the life I made easier." Revik closed his eyes. "Yes," he said. "And I miss you. But I know those aren't the same thing." Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, just full. "I thought loving you would be something I learned," he said. "I thought loyalty would become affection. I thought time would fix what I refused to face." Avera's hands folded in front of her, the way they always had when she was trying not to let something show. "I spent 10 years believing that," she said, "because believing it was easier than accepting I was alone in a marriage." Revik swallowed. "Did you ever—" he began, then stopped. Then asked it anyway, because some questions don't care if they ruin you. "Did you ever love me?" The words hung there. Fragile, terrible, unavoidable. Avera looked at him. Really looked, and felt no anger, no longing, only a quiet, steady certainty. "No." The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. It sat between them like something set down carefully and left there on purpose. Revik stared at her as if he had expected anything else, as if he had built his last hope on the idea that time, or regret, or kneeling might rewrite what he had already broken. Avera's voice was steady when she continued. "I mourned you while we were still married," she said. "I did it quietly, in the same bed, in the same halls. I grieved the man I kept hoping you'd become." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You were gone long before I ever left." Revik's shoulders sagged. "I thought," he began. "I know," Avera said gently. "You thought loyalty would turn into love. I thought so too. That's why it took me so long to stop waiting." Silence stretched. Then she added, not cruelly, just honestly, "I don't hate you, but I don't belong to you anymore, and I won't pretend I ever did." Revik closed his eyes. When he opened them, whatever he had been hoping for was no longer there. "Then do what you have to do," he said. And she did. The judgment was swift, not theatrical, not merciful. Revik was stripped of title, name, and claim. He was given provisions for the road and nothing else. No guards, no banners, no last speeches. He left Veloria at dawn like a man walking out of a story that had ended without him. Mireth and Thalos were exiled the same day. They protested. They argued. They were ignored. Exile, Avera realized, was not about punishment. It was about removal, about saying, "You don't get to shape this world anymore." That night, the palace was too quiet. Victory had not brought celebration yet. Only exhaustion, and only the strange stillness that follows when something heavy finally stops pressing on your chest. Avera walked the corridors without escort and found Cailerin in one of the open galleries overlooking the city. The fires below were fewer now. The streets were calmer. Veloria was learning how to breathe again. He didn't turn when he heard her. "You shouldn't be alone," he said. "Neither should you," she replied. They stood there for a moment, side by side, watching a kingdom rearrange itself around a future that didn't have a clear shape yet. "I spoke to him," Avera said. Cailerin nodded. "I know." She took a breath. "I don't want to be chosen anymore," she said. "I've had a lifetime of that. I want to choose." He turned to face her then. Not hopeful, not demanding. Open. "Choose," he said. So she did. She stepped closer. Well, there was no rush, no heat, no hunger trying to outrun the moment, just intention. She touched his face once, like she was making sure he was real. Then she kissed him. It was quiet, deliberate, earned, not a promise of forever, a promise of honesty. They rested their foreheads together afterward, breathing the same air. Cailerin's voice was low when he spoke. "Stay." It wasn't a command. It wasn't a crown. It was an invitation. And Avera realized she had never been more afraid of an answer. Avera stood beside Cailerin, not behind him, not half a step back, not in the shadow of anyone's crown. Beside. The throne room of Veloria looked different in daylight, stripped of banners that had once pretended permanence. The old sigils of the Ashen Crown had been taken down, but in their place hung nothing yet, just stone and light, and the quiet understanding that some symbols needed time before they deserved to exist again. The council stood in a line that felt less like ceremony and more like reckoning. Cailerin did not sit on the throne. Not yet. He stood in front of it, hands relaxed at his sides, as if he understood that power was something you earned after you proved you knew how to carry it. Avera felt eyes on her, curious, cautious, measuring, not worshipful, not dismissive, learning. That, she realized, was new. A counselor stepped forward. "The kingdom needs to know where it stands," he said. "Who leads? What changes?" Cailerin answered, but he didn't look at the council when he did. He looked at her. "We rebuild," he said, "with people who were told they didn't belong, with laws that remember what power is for, and we do it together." Together. The word did not come with a hand on her shoulder, did not come with ownership, did not come with conditions. It came with space. Avera spoke then, and the room listened in a way it never had before. "The Red Wastes will not be exiles again," she said, "and Valoria will not be a throne built on silence. We will govern with transparency, or not at all." There was no applause. There didn't need to be. Agreement moved through the room like a tide that had finally found its direction. Later, on the balcony overlooking the city, Caloran rested his arms on the stone railing and said, "You don't have to stay in the palace if you don't want to." Avera smiled faintly. "I know. And if you do," he added, "it won't be because you're expected to, or because you're useful, or because it looks good." She turned to him. "It will be because I chose it," she said. "Yes," he replied. "That." They stood there, not touching, not performing, just present. No ghosts between them, no shadows pretending to be obligations. Avera thought about the woman she had been, the one who had learned how to disappear politely, the one who had called endurance love and called loneliness duty. She thought about the moment she had taken Caloran's hand at the border. How small that step had seemed, how enormous it had been. She was not a replacement, not a symbol, not a prize. She was a ruler who had chosen her life. And when Caloran finally did take her hand, it was not to lead her. It was to walk with her. She was never a substitute. She was a queen who finally chose, and was chosen back. And maybe that's the real ending. Not the crowns, not the battles, not even the kiss. But the moment someone who spent years being tolerated finally becomes chosen and chooses back. If you've ever stayed too long, if you've ever made yourself smaller to keep someone comfortable, if you've ever called endurance love because you were afraid to ask for more, I hope Avera's story reminds you of something simple and dangerous and beautiful. You are not a placeholder. You are not a backup plan. You are not a substitute for the life you deserve. You don't have to wait to be chosen. You get to choose. And when you do, the right people won't stand in front of you. They won't stand behind you. They'll stand beside you. Thank you for walking this story with me. Until the next one.